and welcome to another episode of Exploring Standards. I am your host, Jess, and today I'm really excited to be joined by a client of asset risk management, which is always fantastic to get clients on and see their point of view. And today I am joined by Ben Moulds, and he is the Risk Assurance and Compliance Manager at Whistl. Ben, how are you today?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, you?
Yeah, really good. Thank you. Thank you for joining me. So Whistl, a client of Ascent, and they have a very impressive 5 ISO certifications. So they're certified in 9001, 14001, 27001, 45,001 and 50,001. So that is incredible. And today's episode, we are going to be talking about sort of implementing and managing multiple ISOs. So this past year, we have been working with Whistl to sort of help them with their outsourcing their internal audits, to help improve efficiency and effectiveness of their product process. So what we're going to do, though, in this episode is sort of talk like the whole journey that you guys have been on, and kind of where you started and how you got to where you are today. But as always, before we get into the juicy bits, Ben, can you tell us a bit more about yourself, about Whistl and your role within the company?
Yeah, of course. Yes. So as you said, my name's Ben Moulds. I'm the Risk Assurance and Compliance Manager at Whistl. I've been at Whistl 11 years in various roles, starting from kind of quality, been through process improvement, and all of that has led to kind of a natural progression in sort of audit and compliance and risk management. So as you said, I work for a company called Whistl, which is a national logistics company, the largest privately owned logistics company in the UK. And we offer a few different services. So first of all, downstream access for mail. So mostly business to customer mail that we hand over to Royal Mail for final delivery. That includes letters, parcels, packets, pretty much any mail you can think of. Then we also offer e-commerce fulfillment. So we have fulfillment centers across the country where we fulfill for a number of clients. And then a more diverse solution of ours is contact center. So we have a couple of contact centers across the UK that serve a number of clients, whereby that single contact center can serve lots of different clients rather than having a dedicated contact center per client as you might have had in the past. And also we have another service which is called Door Drop Media. So as part of, I guess, an extension to the DSA model is the Door Drop Media. So kind of leaflets that you get through in the post, things that you get within boxes, like, for example, HelloFresh, for example, you might get leaflets or samples. So DDM and another side of the business called Relish are responsible for that for us. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, a logistics and distribution company. But we're pretty big, and we've expanded certainly in the time that I've been here. Fabulous.
So going straight into then sort of your ISO journey, can you tell us the starting point with ISOs, and then obviously then your journey into it as well?
Yeah, so we've historically had a lot of the different ISO standards. I think a lot of people start with 9001, and I think it's safe to say that we sort of did as well. And I think from there, historically, before my time, really, a natural progression then is into 45,001, with health and safety being a core part of the business. And I think over time we've grown in the ISO standards, and I think partly some of that is to do with the commercial need for it. So certain clients demand certain ISO standards, but also on the other side, there's the kind of social aspect of it. We look at things like 14,001, which is environmental, and 50,001 for energy, which are kind of closely related to things like ESG program, EDI, and then of course 27,001 with information security is huge nowadays. And in fact, I think there'd be certain clients that we as a business and other companies wouldn't be able to obtain without things like 27,001, and also maybe things like Cyber Essentials Plus, PCI, which are side certifications, but I think they're connected. So we've had that kind of overall foundation of ISO standards, like I said, starting with 9001 and building up to the 5 certifications that we've got today. So it's quite a beast, an overall management system that we've got. I've always been involved, to some degree. When I started 11 years ago at Whistl as a quality manager, I kind of was aware of the ISO standards and maybe was involved in internal and external audits myself. I was audited, internally and externally. And then as I've grown in the business through time, I've had more of a direct involvement in that. And I moved into an audit and compliance team in 2020. Just before COVID really started. And we were looking to implement 27,001 then. So that was my first direct kind of foray into it. I got certified as a lead auditor for 27001, and as part of the team, we delivered 27001, and I was part of a wider group of people who were looking at and managing the management systems for the other 4 standards as well. So that's kind of where the history of it is for me. And then now, Whistle's approach to audit and compliance has changed a little bit in the last year. And now I oversee all of the management systems, all 5 of them.
Wow, that must be quite the job. Obviously, all 5 of them to manage. But as you said, that we've changed sort of the approach that you've had, and that's obviously by using Ascent, in terms of using us for your audit process. So can we talk about managing the change in program and the different certifications in the program?
Yeah, I mean, so some of the management systems that we have are already quite mature. So, the likes of 9001 and 45001, they've been embedded in the business for quite a while. And I think some of the changes that we've made or been required to make over the last year have been highlighted by Ascent, and working with Ascent to look kind of holistically at all 5. But it's tricky because there's so many clauses and there's so many controls across the multiple standards that sometimes it's difficult to see the wood for the trees. I think what we've been able to do in the last year is to kind of take a step back and probably been aided by the fact that the standards now align in a lot of areas with the clauses. So that makes it a little bit easier. So we're not dealing with one standard that says one thing and another that says something slightly differently. It's a clearer overall view, but certainly from Ascent's perspective, they've been able to, working with us, look at the management systems, any documentation we've got, our processes around audit, and sort of identify some of the gaps and some of the things that we need to change in the management systems, which also lead then to some of the internal processes we need to change, more broadly, whether that's, processes on the shop floor, or whether it's, for example, the way we deal with complaints, or anything that we need to implement from a cyber perspective. So I think one of the challenges with change is that it happens all the time. Every day things are changing within the business. ISO standards are changing regularly as the language changes and the world changes. They have to adapt, but it's difficult to stay on top of all that. It's difficult to capture all change that happens in the company every day. But we're starting to use forums and do that in a way that involves everybody and includes everybody in the right way. But demonstrating that to the likes of certification bodies, which for us is LRQA, is also a bit of a challenge. So I think the biggest thing that we've done over the last year, bringing Ascent in, is using a fresh pair of eyes, but that expertise in all of the management systems and the slightly different approaches that are required for each of them has helped me personally, because I've learned a lot from working with Ascent, but I think has helped Whistl in the way that we handle change around the management systems.
That's really interesting. Sort of how you've been managing the change, and obviously how you're saying you can, couldn't see the wood for the trees, and it can be quite overwhelming. But as you said, breaking it down a bit further. So I know you kind of already touched on this a little bit, but how has having an ISO consultant help you guys?
Yeah, well, we've worked with 3 consultants so far with Ascent, and I think each of them brings a slightly different point of view and a slightly different level of experience, which has actually been really beneficial for us. And for me personally, I'm able to kind of speak to all of the consultants at Ascent and get their opinion and their view on certain things. But I think if we dig into the times that they're on the shop floors or they're with the different departments, the shared services that we have, whilst the consultants that we have audit slightly differently, they do follow a consistent approach in terms of the standards. The differences in the way they audit kind of, I think, keep everybody on their toes a little bit. And I think they each bring their own kind of strengths, which when people in the business see that, they kind of learn a little bit more from the audit process and what's kind of expected of them. But having slightly different approaches every time also helps so that they're not too comfortable, because some of the things they might discuss with one person might be slightly different with somebody else. And I think taking it up a level for me personally, I've had some of the same experiences. So, with Ascent, what we've been able to do is look more closely at the management systems themselves. So the documentation around that, whether it's objectives, whether it's the management system manuals, whether it's things like energy baseline review in 50001, we've been able to look at them and almost audit those things in isolation that we never really did before. And I think that partly that's because we used to have a dedicated audit and compliance team. So I was part of that team, but we kind of owned the management systems, but you can't really mark your own homework, as it were. So one of the benefits to having Ascent is we can now, because the Ascent aren't writing our documentation for us, but they're able to kind of go into things and look at the management systems and say, yeah, that doesn't look quite right. That doesn't really meet the clause, or this actually is something that you're doing really well that you need to, shout from the rooftops a little bit. So I think, those different views and the fact that we can use them as a source of advice, a source of support. And of course, they work with other clients too. So they see best practice in other areas that I don't get exposed to. And again, with an internal team, you don't necessarily get exposed to, because you just look at your own business. You don't see other people. So I think we really do benefit from that wealth of experience and that best practice. And there's a lot of tools that we've benefited from that, whether it's the legal register, for example, or looking at environmental aspects, or again, the way that we measure our energy consumption in 50001. I think if we weren't working with Ascent, we might miss out on some of those tools and techniques and some of that, that vision that the guys have.
That's fantastic to hear. Obviously, having a fresh pair of eyes look at something is always helpful, isn't it? And then, as you said, we can bring our knowledge from, within the industry that we have from other clients and our experiences, I suppose, isn't it? That can kind of help boost all of our clients, which is fantastic. So what other benefits have you found having the multiple ISOs?
That's a good question. I mean, it's an interesting one, because some of it, as I said, is historic, and we had those standards for a long time. I think first and foremost, adherence to the law, and regulatory and compliance obligations is critical. And I think the ISO standards underpin some of that. Obviously we always adhere to the law and any regulation, but the ISO standards take that, I think, to another level, and they give us a kind of a standardized approach in each of those areas. I think it kind of strengthens our compliance with those requirements. So I think in turn that brings commercial benefits. So I touched on it before, but I think with certain standards like 27001 or increasingly 50001 now, you start to see that a lot of the bigger clients that care about things like ESG or EDI or information security and cyber resilience, they're hot topics, but they are important things. But I think when people are looking to do business with you, if you can't demonstrate that you're thinking about those things and that you care about those aspects, I think you sometimes will struggle to maybe secure some of those contracts. So from a commercial perspective, I think the ISO standards broadly, I think are important there. Whether that equates to the 5 standards that we've got, I think is purely because of the kind of the work that we do, and it's quite broad. So I think the benefits are mostly commercial, but also we do align with internal programs and external stuff. So I've mentioned ESG. We use 50001 as an alternative method for ESOS, so we don't follow the normal ESOS. We do the submission, but we don't do the ESOS audits in that way. We use 50001, so that saves time and it potentially saves us some money. And also, I think linking all of the standards together. It's something we've really started to do with Ascent over the last year, but it gives us a coherent kind of management system and a framework that everyone across the business can see. Ultimately, I think sometimes with the ISO standards and some of the work that, if you're in a position like mine, where you're looking at audit and compliance and risk assurance, it's sometimes difficult to justify some of the work you do, right? Because everybody looks at their own role and the value that they bring versus the cost of employing them or the cost of running a program. And certainly with the ISO standards, that can sometimes be a struggle because, the business spends a lot of money on, the work required to implement the standards, to maintain them, to bring in a certifying body to externally audit you against those things. And I think sometimes people don't see what the value of it is because, you're not like I'm not like a salesperson who's bringing money in and adding to the bottom line. If anything, people might look and say, well, you're actually costing money. But then in my view, I think if we didn't have that level of compliance and those specific ISO standards, we would miss out on some big commercial opportunities. And I think as well, we would miss out on some reputational, balance that I think we have in demonstrating just compliance in general. So I think for me, the ISO standards are a lot of work with there being 5, but I think the benefits are broad.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think sometimes, as you rightly said, doing an ISO standard or having the certification and the managing of it can be seen like it's just a big cost, just always a cost. But actually, the benefits do come. As you said, they're not directly bringing in a sale, but you may miss out on tenders. But then also you're streamlining your processes, which then can help sort of time management and that sort of thing. So it is a bigger picture. And then having multiple standards, as you said, you align them together, kind of will help with that process as well. So, have you got any top tips for managing ISO?
Yeah, and I think actually I've probably learned some of these over the last year working with Ascent and being in a position where now, managing all of the management systems directly. For me, the first one is, you have to be clear in your approach. I think making sure we've got clear processes around the management systems, around, internal and external audit and how that works. And also the expectations that you have of others as well, whether that's the top management or whether it's the guys, on the shop floor. Everybody plays a part in the management systems. So, making sure we've got a clear approach and everybody understands how they fit into it would probably be my number one. And then one thing that I've learned a lot from Ascent over the last year is to not just kind of parrot the management systems themselves. I see a lot of documentation internally and, external to Whistl where we kind of just repeat the clauses, word for word almost. And I think what we need to do is ensure that you don't do that and really make it specific to what your business does. So instead of writing, clause 6.2 says this is what Whistl does. And this is our approach, and make it bespoke, make it clear so that, when anybody's looking at it, they can pick up a manual, a process, any document around the management system and understand, right, I see from this is what your interpretation of the clauses, and this is what you actually do. I think that provides absolute clarity, and it supports my first point in being clear on the approach. Mm-hmm. So I think they are critical, but a big part of managing the management systems is the audit program. Of course, 5 management systems is, a lot of audit days, internal audit that Ascent conduct for us, but also our certifying body on the 3-year cycle. We're looking at focus visits, we're looking at, change to approval if we're adding sites or we're changing things. Then you're looking at recertification. And in fact, we're in that recertification window this year for our 45001 certificate. It's a lot of days and it's a lot of time. So planning that is critical and doing it as far in advance as possible to put people's time in the calendar, but also considering activities that are going on in the business at any given time is key. So one of the things we've tried to do this year is move our audits out of the peak period or the peak periods. So usually you sort of Easter for us and then around Christmas or maybe Black Friday as well, not be going in auditing the guys in the warehouses and in the depots at that time. And I think we've been guilty of doing that in the past, but also bringing in our certifying body at the right time as well. But you can only do that if you plan it in advance. Mm-hmm. So we looked at this year's plan in sort of August, September last year, and we'll probably actually look at next year's plan even earlier this year, just to make sure that we're clear on where we're going and for what certification, and also making sure that we know on that 3-year cycle which clauses we're looking at, which departments we're looking at, which controls we need to look at on a kind of a risk-based approach, which is probably my next point, is that you have to do all of this on a risk basis. So I think where you've got mature departments that, kind of sail through audits, don't tend to have any sort of non-conformities, any issues, they can start to drop down the list of priority a little bit. And I think the areas that bring the greatest risk, and for us, that's the depots where we've got transport, we've got operations, we've got lots of health and safety risks, we've got operational risk in terms of SLA deliveries, and that's really where the magic happens. Mm-hmm. So we kind of prioritize some of those departments and those areas where we're really operating versus some of the shared services. If you look at, I don't know, procurement, for example, IT and finance, they sometimes go down the priority list a little bit in terms of audit because they're not as as sort of risky as some of the other areas in operations. So sort of all of those points, I think the clarity, making sure that you've got the bespoke management systems, plan everything to within an inch of its life. It takes up the most of my time on a risk basis. And then I think the final point is that I think when you're subject to audit, whether it's internal audit with your own people or with consultants like Ascent or with a certifying body like LRQA, BSI, Alchemist, whoever it is, I think it's important to not be afraid to challenge those guys. When they come in and they'll make observations, they'll make findings. Sometimes you agree, sometimes you don't. But I think sometimes people can be afraid to challenge back. So the standards say certain things. The law says certain things, and as long as you're operating within those boundaries, you should be able to challenge, some of the opinions of the auditors. And I think audit in general has this kind of negative connotation that we've tried to break over the last year, that it's a witch hunt exercise, or that we're looking for for non-conformity, or we're looking for fault or blame. That's not the case, and I think some of that drives some of that hesitancy to challenge auditors. But I think we should be comfortable in doing that. If we're comfortable with our processes, we feel like we're doing the right thing, and I think generally speaking we are, then we shouldn't be uncomfortable with challenging. And I think that's good, because only then can you get a kind of holistic view on where you're at.
Yeah, I love that. I think all of your top tips have been absolutely fantastic. I think you've summarized it perfectly, to be honest. But as I said, your company better than anybody, and an auditor's job isn't to come in and say you're doing all these things wrong. It's actually, let's look at what you're doing right and then where we can improve. And if you can justify things, and that's brilliant. It means your business, means your management system as well, which obviously that's not a bad thing, is it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we wrap up today's episode, are there any final comments or anything else you'd like to add?
I think we've changed our approach in the last year by bringing in Ascent instead of a dedicated internal team. And that sort of in the initial phase brought some raised eyebrows, maybe, and some questions, because it's a big change in an approach with a team that had been in the business a long time and had a lot of knowledge. But I think what we've found with Ascent is that sometimes you can know a bit too much. And, so when you have internal auditors and they may have gone around the cycle a few times, they understand the processes, they kind of know what they're looking for. I think sometimes they can know a bit too much detail, and that doesn't always help to kind of take a step back. And so I think Ascent have been able to really do that as kind of outsiders to Whistl. I think over the last 15, 16 months, the consultants that we've worked with have learned a lot about Whistl. But I think the approach has been a bit more high level, but they've dug into areas of detail that people haven't been used to before. So it's definitely a changed approach, and I think it's been beneficial for us. And I think we see the goal for me is to try and create less audit output or less work for the people being audited in the business, and because audit is a huge part of the management systems. And I think we're on the path to doing that. Where I think people now are getting more comfortable with audit being an activity that isn't something to be scared by, and it isn't a negative thing. It actually is, like you said, we're looking for compliance, and we're looking to find the good stuff and share that. We've seen so many examples over the last year in lots of different departments where the consultants might ask the auditees, well, have you shared this with anybody else? Have you talked about this with other departments? Are you sharing best practice? Are you advertising your wins? And often we're not, and I think we should. So of course, pick up the non-conformities, pick up the things that we're doing wrong that we need to resolve and plug those gaps. But really focus on the positives. And I think Ascent have really helped us to do that and continue to do that. I think above that, the position that Ascent is in. I think as a business, you kind of Ascent has to be at the forefront of the ISO standards and new and emerging legislation, new standards, and so I think things like AI is a great example. AI is a hot topic and it's on everybody's radar. Having Ascent there, to talk to use as a sounding board is a huge benefit for me personally. So if we're looking at AI or changing ISO standards, there's information everywhere, right? You can go to LinkedIn, you can go to Google. There's AI itself now that will give you answers to a lot of things. But sometimes it can be overwhelming because there's so much information that it's difficult sometimes to kind of really hone in on that. I've found with Ascent over the last year that I've been able to kind of, pick up the phone or have a Teams chat with the consultants or with the wider Ascent team to discuss some of those things and to float some ideas. And aside from the audit program, we're moving into the new standard of 27001, so we're in the middle of the transition. And I think Ascent have really supported us with that and adopting some slightly new approaches to that. And we're kind of thinking outside the box on certain things that we wouldn't have done without Ascent. So one example of that is on physical security of our sites. As part of the 27001 program, obviously, we look at physical security as the controls of the standard there. But we're taking that to another level now, is that we're going to start to really do infiltration tests. So the Ascent consultants are going to physically try to enter our premises to kind of identify our risks. And we've never really done anything like that before. I think we've probably been afraid to. But now with Ascent, I think we've got, we're not afraid to think outside the box, and I want people to kind of be involved in identifying the risks, be identified in remedial actions on certain things. So infiltration tests is going to be fascinating to see how that pans out. But obviously we need to make sure that, we work with the teams internally, we set expectations clearly, and as with the wider program, it's not about blame for anybody. It's not about, putting anybody, pointing fingers at anybody. It's about making sure that we've covered our risks from a commercial perspective more than anything. But yeah, I think Ascent enabled us to do that, and they've enabled us to have a little bit more flexibility to explore some ideas that we might not have had before. So yeah.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. Obviously, it's always, working for Ascent, it's always wonderful to hear that our consultants are doing such a wonderful job and the benefits you're seeing from using us. So that's been fantastic. So thank you very much. Right. Well, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I really hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you, Ben, for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Fantastic. So if you have enjoyed the episode, please make sure you rate, review and subscribe. It really does help the podcast. And I'll be back with an episode in a couple of weeks.